Hey guys, how's it going? Welcome back to my channel. Fedora 32 was recently released, and I always make it a point to check out the latest release every time they put one out, and Fedora 32 is no exception. I definitely wanted to give that a review, and that's what I'm going to do in this video right here. So let's go ahead and dive right in to my review of Fedora 32. So let's first talk about the installation. So after you create your bootable Fedora flash drive, start your computer with it, you'll be presented with this screen right here where you are given the option to try Fedora or to go ahead and install it. Normally what I like to do is try first because that basically allows me the opportunity to see whether or not this release is compatible with my hardware before I blow away my current distribution. So at this point, we're in live mode, same as before. I can go ahead and open up a web browser, for example, make sure that everything works just like I think it should. And of course, everything is going to run a bit slower off the installation media, depending on the speed of your flash drive, than it would if it were installed. But you'll get a general feel for how Fedora will run on your hardware. And then, when you're ready to do so, you go ahead and click over here to install to hard drive. And then up comes the installer. So nothing much has changed when it comes to the installer. It's still just as boring as it was before. And it gets the job done though, so I'll just accept the defaults here. And then of course, we'll go ahead and choose the hard drive, which is the only one I have here. So I'll just click done. And since it already has a distribution installed on it, I'm going to need to reclaim space. Now I kind of wish that there was an option to just simply click a button even before this step that just says something like wipe drive or something like that. Basically how Ubuntu does it, but that's a minor complaint because I'll just click reclaim space and I'll end up with basically the same result, but I effectively have to delete all the partitions manually rather than being able to click just one button and have it do it in one shot. So I'll reclaim the space, and that should satisfy the requirements of this section here. Of course, we could change the keyboard layout or the time and date if we wish, but all of those are fine for me. And just like that, it's installing. So there's actually fewer steps here than with the Ubuntu installer, but I still would like to see more options when it comes to the installation. But you know what? As long as the installer works like it should be something that you only see once anyway. So I can understand not putting all of their priority on the development of this installer. So I'll go ahead and let it finish, and then I'll be right back. And now the installation is complete. Overall, the installation process feels very sluggish to me, like it takes longer than other distributions take that I've tried recently. For example, Ubuntu 20.04, Manjaro 20, both of which were reviewed on my channel recently, installed much more quickly than this did. But again, as long as they're doing it right and giving you an upgrade option, which they do, then you should only see the installation screen just one time. So I guess it's not really that big of a deal. So I'll click Finish Installation, and then I'll start into the new installation by just restarting my laptop here. And here we go. Let's see if this is installed properly. And then the first thing we'll see when we start up our new installation is this little welcome screen right here. Now I'm going to leave these settings mostly at default. You can sign into your online accounts if you have any of these here. I'll skip it for now. And then I'll go ahead and create my user. And then the password. And we should be good to go. And now I've logged into the installation. You get this Getting Started screen right here from Gnome, which shows you basically how to do various things on the Gnome desktop. I'll close it on my end. Now already I can see that there's a big difference in performance. If I was to go ahead and launch an application, I'm just going to click on some random applications here. We can see that this is very responsive. And you know what? I've noticed that it was very slow running off the USB, even slower than other distributions running off the same flash drive before I installed it. And even the installer was sluggish. But now that it's actually installed on actual hardware and the installation is finished, I will say that it does feel like a very responsive and snappy distribution. And that's due in part of GNOME 3.36. They're always making improvements on performance. But I'm sure the Fedora developers have also gone ahead and added their own customizations as well. And then up here, I did see a message that we have updates available. So I may as well go ahead and do that and get everything up to date. So I'll just click Restart and Update. And then you'll see what it looks like to actually install updates on Fedora 32. Okay, now we're starting up. And right now you can see that it is installing updates. It does it via its own screen during restart. I actually like that quite a bit because it takes some of the factors away, such as running applications and things like that. Gives you a better likelihood of a successful update. I just think that it looks very professional. I actually like it. There we go. We're restarting again. And now we are logged into a freshly updated Fedora 32. I even get a message right here that confirms that updates have been installed. And it basically just shows me, well, exactly what was updated. But what's also cool here is apparently I have firmware updates available for my ThinkPad, which is pretty cool because, you know, installing firmware updates from Linux is not new, but I haven't personally seen this be offered to me from Fedora before. So you know what? Why don't we just go ahead and do it? I'm going to go ahead and click Update. Let's see what happens. Then I'll restart. And we can see that the firmware is actually updating, which is pretty cool. And it's especially interesting to me because for the majority of the time that I've been using Linux, this is just not something that would have been possible. So I'm glad to see that support is here in Fedora. I think that's actually just really an awesome thing. Okay, we're starting back up. And it happened off camera because the screen recorder wasn't able to capture it, but it did actually show another progress bar that did go ahead and fill up as it was updating the system. And now that that's done, I should be on the latest firmware. All right, so let's go ahead and check out the other firmware updates. There are 3 more remaining. So there's one here for my hard drive. Why not? I'll go ahead and be the guinea pig for you guys. No problem. I'll click Update. Restart. Okay, here I am back at the desktop again. And interesting, when I installed that update for the SSD, there was no visual indicator during boot at all that anything was happening. But it is off the list now, so I guess I have to assume that it probably was successful. So I'm going to go ahead and just update everything. Why not? All right, here we are once again on the desktop. And we have everything installed. And that means not just the software updates for the distribution itself, but firmware updates as well, which means that the desktop experience of Fedora 32 is actually, well, that's pretty decent. And since we're here in GNOME software anyway, we can go ahead and take a look around and just install a random application just to see what the process looks like. Now right away we get an option to enable third-party repositories. I'll go ahead and turn that on. But now we actually have the capability of installing applications, even some of those that might require something proprietary, depending on our use case. So I enabled that just to see what would happen. And what happens if I search for Chrome? Right here we have Google Chrome. So I will go ahead and install that. And let's see what happens. Well, it says it's installed. Is it in the menu? It is. And we have Google Chrome on our Fedora 32 installation, so we should be able to watch as our available RAM just cries and asks for mercy. No, I'm kidding. I'm being a little dramatic here. I'm just kidding. So we have Chrome. So for those of you that require Chrome for one reason or another, that just goes to show you that you can get that in this release. And there's actually a lot of applications that we can install here. So Shutter, for all of you photographers and inspiring photographers, will be able to get this installed here. So this is pretty cool. I'll go ahead and install that. And while that's installing, I noticed that it has 3 stars here. I wonder why that is. Doesn't work after Fedora 25. Doesn't work in Fedora 25. Not compatible with GNOME 3, so maybe I didn't choose a good app here. Maybe I did. Maybe this would be a fun experiment. And it's still kind of hung on 0%. Oh, it just jumped to 100. That was a little interesting, so let's launch it. And it does open up, so maybe the complaints against Fedora 25, maybe it's been fixed. I would certainly hope so, since that was about 7 versions ago. So maybe they might want to clean up the reviews a little bit. But you know what? We installed an application. You already saw the process for installing updates. And then also I can go ahead and go here to remove applications as well. Let's take a quick look around this new release. You see some of the applications that are installed by default. Now, I don't suspect very many of these are all that different, and Shutter is something that I installed during this review. Now, Firefox, of course, is the default browser, just like before, no surprise there. And out of the box, we have version, well, we have 75, and I did install updates, so there's that. So you're going to get the latest version of Firefox, which is pretty cool. Rhythmbox for those of you that are like me and you actually still rip CDs, because you know it's the only thing we can trust nowadays, because it's just not great when Spotify loses a license or doesn't even have a license to play something. Like some time ago I was trying to play Tool albums and found out that Spotify didn't offer that. They do now, but it's just one of those things. If you have a CD and you rip your CDs, well, then nobody can take that away from you. And Rhythmbox is a good application for enjoying your media collection. It defaults to the music folder, no surprise there. So you should be able to just put your MP3s or OGG files, whatever you have in that folder, and they should show up here for you to enjoy. So that's awesome. LibreOffice, no surprise there. That's been the default Office suite for as long as I can remember now, on virtually all Linux distributions, and it's what I've written my books with. And you know what? It's great. It allowed me to get my work done, and I can't complain a bit. So here you go. And of course, if you've ever used an Office suite or a word processor, you know what to expect here. Now, for the most part, the benefits that you get in Fedora 32 come directly from GNOME 3.36. Which unfortunately means that Fedora really doesn't bring much to the table when it comes to new features, but they do offer a stable and solid GNOME experience. Now, one feature from GNOME 3.36 that I actually like, it's not installed by default for some strange reason, but if I search for extensions, let's see if it comes up, and here it is, Manage Your GNOME Extensions. Now, I've reviewed Manjaro 20 and Ubuntu 20.04, both of which include this by default. So I don't understand why it's not included by default in Fedora, but I'll go ahead and install it now. And now that's installed. And then we can see that there actually is one extension enabled, background logo, which is probably this Fedora logo here. Let's see. And I was right. That's how we get the little Fedora logo there on the wallpaper. And that actually brings me to what I feel is possibly the greatest disappointment of Fedora, which has been something that has disappointed me for pretty much every release in as long as I can remember. And that's the fact that they really bring no polish to the table whatsoever. So I'll show you what I mean. If I open up the file manager here, what we have is the default Gnome look and feel, the default Gnome theme, which is okay. It's just very, very bland. It actually looks like something from the Windows Vista days, but even Windows Vista had more color gradients than the default Gnome theme. The Gnome developers have been improving the theme, and I'm glad that they have been doing that. But what you're getting here is the default Gnome theme that's provided directly from Gnome. Fedora makes no customizations whatsoever, but there's a reason why the majority of distributions actually go ahead and customize this, because by default, well, the Gnome theme just looks very bland, and I really feel like Fedora should be doing more to polish this. If you want the default theme, for example, in Ubuntu, you can go ahead and switch back to it. But both Ubuntu and Manjaro offer a better look and feel for the Gnome experience than Fedora does. It just seems like Fedora does the least possible amount of polish that they can. And, this is a good example of that. Background logo. That's it. That's the only polish that they really give you on the Gnome desktop, aside from the boot splash. But when it comes to the desktop itself, you get a logo. That's it. That's the only customization that they actually do here, which I think makes Pop! OS and Ubuntu 2004 look a lot better and more modern and more professional by comparison. But aside from that, we actually have a very good Gnome experience other than the UI. The UI is lackluster, but it is very performant. I think that's one thing that's really going to stand out here. It's just snappy, it's very responsive. The desktop experience, or in my case, laptop experience, is really good because it even allowed me to install firmware for my system, and all of my hardware seems to be detected just fine. And I guess that's the least you could really ask for here, is that your hardware be supported and that everything run fast and efficiently. Fedora definitely delivers on that front. In fact, I'm going to go ahead and open up the system monitor here. Now that I have no applications running, I don't even have Firefox running right now, we can actually get a look for what the default resource utilization actually is. And you know what? It's 1.6 gigabytes, which is actually more than what the Gnome edition of Manjaro was using at about 1.2 gigabytes. So I'm getting a little bit more RAM saturation here, which is kind of weird. And I don't know if maybe there's a background process that's running that I'm not basically noticing here. But keep that in mind. If you're wanting to run this on an older machine and you had like 4 gigs of RAM, almost half of that would be used. So I think it's a downside that Fedora is using more RAM than other distributions that also utilize Gnome. But if you have a modern machine like I do, it probably doesn't matter because it does run very well. And I think that you'll be impressed by the performance. It is, like I mentioned several times, snappy and very responsive. So there you go. That was my review of Fedora 32. And you know what? It's definitely a good release. There's plenty of good things that I can say about it. The desktop experience has improved. And I was even able to update my firmware on my laptop, which is pretty cool. It's fast and it's responsive. But Fedora has always been somewhat of a challenge for me to review. And the reason for that is because while they always seem to put out a good release each and every single time, they can never seem to stand out in any exceptional way, and the overall experience just comes off as bland. Now, Fedora 32 is no exception. It's a good release, but you get a vanilla Gnome experience with no polish whatsoever, no theming, and basically it's just Gnome as the developers intended, which could be considered a good thing or a bad thing, but with the theming and the overall look and feel not really looking modern or even anything from this particular decade at all, it just kind of makes Fedora look a little bland. and they don't seem to have any features that really stand out. Ubuntu 20.04 was released just recently, and I feel that overall it's a better GNOME experience, a better desktop distribution, because it just seems to eclipse Fedora in every single way. But that doesn't mean that you shouldn't try Fedora, because maybe you are already a fan of Fedora, and whether you like Fedora or hate it, Fedora 32 will not change your opinion. If you hate it, you'll still hate it. If you love it, you'll still love it, because it's more of the same in this release. And even though Ubuntu gives you a better overall experience, maybe you want a vanilla GNOME experience, in which case Fedora is perfect for you. And if you work on CentOS or Red Hat servers for your job, for example, then I think you'll fit in very well with Fedora, because there's going to be a lot of carryover in between the two different platforms. So still check it out. I don't mean to disparage Fedora. It is a good distribution. It's just outdone yet again by Ubuntu with their 20.04 release. But anyway, what is your opinion of Fedora? Have you had a chance to check out Fedora 32 yet? Let me know in the comments below, and I'll see you again real soon.